I have a story to tell. My name is Logan. Nice to meet you. I'm not going to ask you to feel sorry for me or try to understand the stupid things I did. I just want to get out what happened, the way I remember it. If it'll make sense to you, I don't know. Sometimes it still doesn't make sense to me. I didn't plan any of that night. I just needed to run, finding out that the woman I loved was cheating on me with my best friend. Look, no one's prepared for a blow like that. So I did the only thing that seemed right at the time, grabbed my car keys and drove away. I didn't have a destination. I just wanted to leave behind the walls of that house that now felt suffocating. The whole city was a scene of betrayal, as if the streets, the buildings, everything was laughing at me behind my back. I needed to escape. The old road was my choice. Hardly anyone passes through there, especially at night. I thought the silence of the countryside would help me organize my thoughts. But it didn't. It only amplified the chaos in my head. I was driving fast, too fast. It was stupid, I know, but at the time it felt liberating. If I drove fast enough, maybe I could leave behind the image of her in his arms. It followed me, clinging to my skin like a bad smell that won't come off no matter how hard you scrub. Then the curve came. I should have remembered it. I grew up driving on that road during the holidays, going to my grandparents' house, but pain made me blind. By the time I noticed, it was too late. The steering wheel wouldn't respond. The car was sliding like a stone skipping on water. The rest was a blur. The world spun in a chaos of noise and pain. The feeling of falling, the sound of glass shattering, the dull impact that knocked the air out of my lungs. Everything hurt. Every part of my body felt broken inside and out. Then came the darkness, a comfortable, quiet void. Part of me wanted to stay there, to sink into unconsciousness so I wouldn't have to deal with anything when I woke up. It seemed easier. But then I heard a voice, soft, hesitant. It was like it was coming from far away. I couldn't make out the words, just the worried tone. Then hands touched me gently. I felt my body being dragged, which brought the pain back all at once. I tried to speak, but my throat only let out a weak groan before I blacked out again. When I woke up, the smell of earth and fresh coffee was the first thing I noticed. The wooden ceiling above me was worn, like it had seen decades go by without a rush. I had no idea where I was, only that I wasn't home, and that my life had just changed in a way I never imagined. I woke up in a place I didn't recognize, and let me tell you, it wasn't that lazy weekend kind of waking up. It was the kind that makes you gasp for air, like you've just come up from underwater. Pain was the second thing I felt, throbbing all over my body, like I'd been hit by a truck. And honestly, that wasn't too far from the truth. The bed was hard, the sheets rough, smelling like homemade soap. Above me, the wooden ceiling looked like it was about to cave in, with cracks drawing maps I couldn't quite understand. I tried to move, but my right shoulder protested with a sharp pain. I closed my eyes, trying to remember what had happened. The curve, the car flipping, the silence that followed. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what that meant. I should be in a hospital. But this wasn't a hospital. It didn't have that disinfectant smell or those cold white walls. The smell here was of earth, fresh coffee, and bread baking. Before I could piece it all together, I heard footsteps. Light, but determined, like someone who knew exactly where each floorboard creaked. I braced myself to see a nurse or, who knows, maybe a cop ready to ask questions. What appeared in the doorway was a girl. Brown hair tied up in a messy bun, a simple dress stained with dirt and flour. Her face looked young, but her eyes, those eyes had seen a lot, and I don't just mean sadness. There was a determination there that I couldn't quite figure out. She stopped at the doorway, holding a steaming mug, looking at me like she wasn't sure what to do with me. "You're awake." It wasn't a question. "Looks like it." My voice came out rough, like I'd swallowed broken glass. "Thought you might not wake up." She walked into the room slowly, like she was afraid I'd run away. If she made one wrong move, maybe I would have. She placed the mug on the table beside the bed. The smell of coffee got stronger. I wanted to thank her, but the words wouldn't come out. The girl looked at me again, her eyes scanning my injuries. "You were pretty messed up when I found you on the road. Thought you weren't going to make it." Her voice was firm, but I noticed the hesitation. She didn't seem like the kind of person used to talking to strangers. What was I supposed to say? Thanks for saving me. Sorry for crashing into your life. How did I end up here? She crossed her arms like she was trying to protect herself from something. "I dragged you to my truck. Didn't have time to call for help. You were bleeding too much." She shrugged, like dragging an unconscious man was the most normal thing in the world. I looked at her more carefully. Slim, but strong. Shoulders straight, posture firm. A girl who was used to carrying her own weight, and probably other people's too. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to. I just did what anyone would have done." Her voice softened a bit, like she was saying it to convince herself, but I knew that wasn't true. Nobody does that for a stranger. "Parachuted into your life? How did I end up here?" She crossed her arms, as if trying to protect herself from something. "I dragged you to my truck. Didn't have time to call for help. You were bleeding too much." She shrugged, like dragging an unconscious man was the most normal thing in the world. I looked at her more closely. Slim, but strong. Shoulders straight, posture firm. A girl who was used to carrying her own weight, and probably the weight of others too. "Thank you, I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to. I just did what anyone would have done." Her voice softened a bit, as if she was saying it to convince herself. But I knew that wasn't true. Nobody does that for a stranger. Or maybe they do, but not where I come from. The pain in my shoulder started throbbing again, and I couldn't hold back a groan. She moved closer without hesitation and adjusted the sling holding my arm. Her hands were firm, careful. I tried not to think about how close she was. "You were lucky. Could have broken your neck on that curve." Her tone was neutral, almost clinical. I closed my eyes, remembering the car spinning, the world turning upside down. Yeah, I was an idiot. Admitting that to her was easier than I thought it would be. She stepped back, crossing her arms again. "Most people are on that curve. You weren't the first. Seems like you've got experience with that." "Oh, I know what it's like when pain makes you forget to pay attention to the road." She looked away, her words sounding more personal than she intended. I felt a weight in that sentence, a weight that made me want to ask more. But the way she closed herself off told me I wouldn't get any answers, at least not now. "You didn't ask my name." "I don't need to." She shrugged. "Name doesn't matter when the guy's unconscious and bleeding on the side of the road." A small smile escaped before I could stop it. "Logan," I said. "Logan Carter." She raised her eyebrows, but not the way I expected. No sign of recognition, which was rare. I was pretty famous around here. "I'm Lila." Just like that. No last name, no questions. That's when I realized. She had no idea who I was. I still don't know why I'm telling all of this. Maybe it's just to try to understand how I ended up here, or maybe because talking is easier than feeling. I stayed in that bed for days. The pain was constant, but honestly, that was the least of it. It hurt more to remember the reason I took that road. Betrayal. By my wife. By my best friend. If I closed my eyes, I could still see it. The two of them together. In our house. In my bed. I looked away, focusing on the wooden ceiling of Lila's house. I couldn't stop wondering why she had helped me. Who sees a stranger wrecked on the side of the road and brings him home? Who cares that much? Why was she still taking care of me? The world I knew didn't work like that. Out there, it was every man for himself. But Lila was different. The way she showed up every morning, leaving coffee and fresh bread by the bed, always in silence, never asking questions. It bothered me how much I was starting to look forward to it. That morning I finally got the courage to ask, "Why are you doing this? Helping me?" She didn't look surprised by the question. She leaned against the doorframe, wiping her hands on an apron stained with flour. "I don't know." Her tone was so blunt that I almost laughed. "I guess that's just what we do around here. We take care of each other." I didn't know how to respond. She turned to leave, but hesitated at the door. "You should try walking. Your muscles will atrophy if you stay in that bed forever." I tried to protest, but the pain in my back spoke louder. "Walk? Where? There's plenty of ground around here." She gave a half smile, a slightly mocking one. "And I could use an extra hand on the farm if you're brave enough." Brave. I couldn't remember the last time someone spoke to me like that, like I had something to prove. I decided to get up, even though my body disagreed with every movement. The pain was intense, but I needed to do something. Anything to avoid standing still, thinking about the mess my life had become. I needed to get out and escape the thoughts consuming me. The house was simple, old furniture but well cared for. The wood creaked under my feet, like it had been a long time since anyone walked there. I wondered if she lived alone. I wondered if she lived alone. If she had anyone who cared about her. I couldn't imagine that. Someone like Lila deserved the whole world. I walked out the back door and found her in the yard, scattering feed for half a dozen chickens. She looked at me in a way that wasn't approving or surprised, like she already knew I'd end up there. "I'm not exactly a farmer. Neither am I." She shrugged, no drama. "But someone's got to do the work." We didn't talk much after that. She just handed me a heavy bucket and pointed to the direction of the pen. I went because somehow it felt like the right thing to do. The weight of the bucket made my arms ache, but I didn't complain. I worked in silence, just like she did. The farm was small, but well maintained, despite signs of wear. The fences were crooked, needing repair, and the barn had a hole in the roof. I couldn't imagine how she managed it all alone. A girl that small, taking care of an entire property. We worked together all day without talking much. And for the first time since the accident, I didn't think about the betrayal. I didn't think about the city, my business, or the scandal that had probably already blown up in the media. I only thought about the hot sun on my back, the smell of earth, and the sound of her voice calling the chickens as if they were children. It was a good place to hide, and I was starting to realize I didn't want to leave. Have you ever felt like you were running away from something, but you didn't quite know what? I thought I was running from the betrayal, from the pain, from the shame. But there, on Lila's farm, I started to realize that what I was really trying to avoid was myself. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The house made strange noises when the wind blew. The wood creaked like it was whispering old secrets. I turned over in bed for the 1,000th time, trying to find a position that didn't hurt my ribs. I couldn't. I gave up on sleep and went out to the back porch. The sky was so full of stars, it looked like someone had thrown glitter up there. You don't see a sky like that in the city, with all those artificial lights. I stood there, just looking, trying to sort out my thoughts. I thought I was alone, but then I heard the old chair creak. Lila was sitting in the corner, hugging her knees and staring into nothing. I don't know how I hadn't noticed her before. "Thought you were already asleep." My voice came out lower than I expected. "Haven't been sleeping much lately." She didn't look at me. Her voice had a tiredness to it that I hadn't noticed before. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there in silence, looking at the stars with her. After a while, Lila let out a deep sigh. Are you leaving soon? The question caught me off guard. I don't know. I think I'm just putting off the inevitable. And what's so bad that you don't want to face it? She finally turned her face toward me, her eyes analyzing me in a way that made me feel exposed. I could have given an empty answer, dodged the question, but there, in the simplicity of that farm, lying felt wrong. My wife cheated on me with my best friend. The words came out dry, emotionless, like I was talking about the weather. I saw them together, and I couldn't stay there. I couldn't face it. She stayed silent, her gaze returning to the stars. For a moment, I thought I had said too much, that I had scared her off. But then she said, "My dad can't walk anymore. Can't even speak properly. A stroke took all that away." I didn't expect that. I had no idea she was carrying such a heavy burden. She said it in a way that made my problem feel small compared to hers, so I responded, I'm sorry. And you don't have to be." Her voice was firm, but her shoulders were slumped, as if the weight of the world had fallen on them. "It won't change anything." We stood there, two strangers sharing a pain no one else could see. No words were needed. Just being there was enough. After a while, Lila looked at me again. "So, now what? What are you going to do?" I ran my hands through my hair, the knot in my throat tightening again. "I don't know. If I go back to the city, I'll have to face everything, the divorce, the scandal, the business, and I don't know if I'm ready for that." "You can't hide here forever, Logan." Her voice held no judgment, just a bitter acceptance, like she understood all too well what it was like to try to run away from reality, was trying to escape reality. "I know, but it's easy to stay here." I looked at her, trying to find the right words. "Here, it feels simpler." She smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "It's not as simple as it seems." I didn't understand it at the time, but the way she said it made me want to know more, made me want to understand what she was hiding behind all that strength. "Why are you helping me, Lila? I'm just a stranger." She shrugged, her gaze returning to the stars. "I think I just needed someone around." The honesty in her voice surprised me. "And somehow you showed up." I stayed silent, feeling the weight of that confession. There, on that old, dimly lit porch, we weren't just two strangers. We were two broken people trying to find a way to keep going. I knew I couldn't stay there forever, that someday I'd have to go back to my complicated life. But for now, staying at Lila's farm felt like all I needed. There are things in life you can't avoid, no matter how hard you try. And that morning, the thing I wanted to avoid the most showed up in the form of a shiny black car driving up the dirt road. Mark stepped out of the car in the same impeccable suit as always, his expression cold and controlled, like he was walking into an important meeting. I watched his eyes move over the crooked fences, the chickens running loose, and then stop on me. He stood there for a second, analyzing me like he was looking at a man who had lost his mind. I was covered in dirt and sweat, a shovel in my hand, not at all what he expected to see when he finally found me. He straightened his tie before he spoke, his tone so dry that I almost laughed. "Logan, enough of this nonsense. It's time to come back." Those words stirred something in me, a rage I'd been pushing down for weeks. All I wanted was peace. I wanted to forget about the betrayal, the scandal, the world that had collapsed on my head. But Mark showed up as a reminder of everything I was trying to run from. I didn't even think. I just let instinct take over. I dropped the shovel and moved toward him, my fists clenched on their own. By the time I realized what was happening, my punch had already connected with his face. Mark hit the ground with a dull thud, his face dirty with dust. I stood there, breathing heavily, my chest rising and falling as pain throbbed through my knuckles. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, as if he were the one to blame for everything, for the betrayal, for my escape, for the mess that was my life. Mark didn't defend himself. He didn't even try to fight back. He just stayed there, looking at me with the saddest expression I had ever seen on his face. And that's when I realized he understood. He knew the punch wasn't meant for him. It was meant for me. Lila was on the porch, watching everything. She didn't look surprised or angry, just indifferent, like she had seen worse in her life. Maybe she had. Mark wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, got up with a groan, and straightened his jacket. "You needed that, didn't you?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He stepped closer, his face now serious, his eyes steady. "You can't run away forever, Logan. The media is making a circus out of your absence. The shareholders are threatening to sell everything. If you don't come back now, you'll lose the empire you built. Everything you worked for. Are you really going to let that happen?" His words hit hard. They reminded me of the weight I was carrying, of the responsibilities I was abandoning. And for a second, I almost got back in the car with him, almost gave up everything I had found here on the farm. But then I looked at Lila. She was still on the porch, arms crossed, her face expressionless. She didn't make a move to stop me from leaving. She didn't ask me to stay. She didn't have to. I turned my gaze back to Mark, the anger rising again. To hell with the media, to hell with the shareholders. I didn't hold back the words or try to control my tone. "I'm not going back. Not now." Mark narrowed his eyes. I saw the frustration growing on his face. I saw the control he always had start to crack. "You're a coward, Logan." His voice was tense, full of resentment. "You're running because you're afraid to face what happened. You're hiding behind this farm, behind that girl, like a scared little boy." I didn't think Mark would do what he did next. The punch caught me by surprise. My head snapped back, and the metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. My knees buckled, but I caught myself before I fell. I looked at him, still shocked. Mark lowered his arms slowly, his breathing heavy. "I'm telling you this because I'm your friend, Logan, because I care. But I'm not going to let you run from your problems like a coward. Not this time." The pain in my face was nothing compared to the blow of his words. I knew Mark was right. I knew I was running away. But for the first time, I didn't care. "You're going back to the city and facing everything." Mark ran a hand over his chin, wiping away the dried blood. "You're going to do it because it's the right thing to do. Because you're Logan Carter. You don't quit. You never have." I looked at Lila once more. "I'm not going back now. You're going to handle it for me." My voice came out firm without hesitation. "Give me 2 days. 2 days to breathe, to figure out what I really want. And when you come back, bring me good news, because I'm not ready to leave this place just yet." Mark looked at me for a long time, trying to find a crack in my determination. He didn't find one. He nodded slowly, like he finally understood. 2 days. Nay, his voice came out almost as a sigh. "But after that, you're going to have to face your life." I nodded, accepting the deal. Mark walked away, his suit stained with dust, his face marked by the punch I threw. And I knew that had been the most honest conversation we'd ever had. When Mark left, the silence returned. Lila was still on the porch, arms crossed. I climbed the steps slowly, feeling every muscle in my body protest. She looked at me, her expression impassive. She didn't ask anything. She didn't make a scene. She just stood there, waiting for me to speak. I moved closer, stopping just inches away from her. "You saw everything, huh?" My voice came out rough, tired. "I did." She didn't look away. "Aren't you going to ask anything?" "I don't need to." Lila sighed. "If you wanted to tell me, you would have by now." I stood there in silence, feeling the weight of her words. No judgment, no demands, just acceptance. I took a step closer, closing the space between us. Lila didn't back away. I saw her breathing quicken, but her eyes remained steady, looking at me without fear. Before I could hesitate, I kissed her. It wasn't an urgent kiss. It wasn't to prove anything. It was gentle, like a whisper, like a thank you that words couldn't express. When I pulled back, I looked into her eyes and finally managed to say, "Thank you. You saved me. Not just from the accident. You saved me from the chaos I was in." She gave me a small smile, her face softening. "Then it's time to learn how to live, Logan Carter." And right there, I knew that was exactly what I was going to do.